Well, hello and welcome to the Unlocking Workplace Wellbeing podcast for HR managers and business owners, where we talk about workplace wellbeing to make everyone's lives better, including yours and mine. I'm Stephen Pink. I'm Chief Executive of Verve Healthcare, and I'm really pleased that our guest for this episode is a professional called Sue Hewitt. Now, Sue is the founder of Develomenta, which is an organisation focused on developing happy managers who inspire and retain confident staff. And of course, that's something we all want to do. I know all managers, a bit like me, like to think we're great at what we do, but how can you tell if you're a bad one? And what can you then do about it? Let's ask Sue.
Hello, lovely to be here.
So I've got to ask you, first of all, bad bosses, how do you spot them?
Well, they sort of have an aura around them from a distance. No, of course not. You spot them from the outside because you'll find that from an HR perspective, you might have more people leaving from their team than you might expect because they're not getting the support that they need. So you might see like a high turnover of staff. You might see maybe more sick leave than you might expect. So just odd days here and there, people like, like maybe taking a Wednesday off and that sort of stuff, inexplicably. You might see people there at all times of the day and night being overworked because they're frightened about what the manager might say if they don't complete their stuff. And you might also see other people around reluctant to engage with that team because the atmosphere within the team, which is starts with the boss, is perhaps not very good. And you might also find people coming to HR for help with things like mental health problems, maybe more than you might in other teams. So those sorts of things will give you an indication.
And do you, I hope you don't mind asking, do you tend to see that the incidence of that, is it increasing or staying about the same or getting better in your view?
You'd probably see the incidence of people coming for additional support go up because that sort of thing, there should be help from the manager, and the manager will refer you to HR or other support services if it's beyond their capabilities. But actually day-to-day support of looking after people really should be done by the manager. And if that's not being done, it'll get escalated up to HR. And so we'll see that incidence probably going up. Yeah.
Okay, scary stuff. But I suppose in some way or other, we've probably all either seen it or experienced it from one perspective or the other in our working lives at some point. I suppose it's important not to be frightened of tackling it if that's what we see going on. Is that
definitely
fair to say that?
definitely It helps everybody. So it helps the team if we can tackle it, but it also helps the manager as well, because often the managers themselves are probably unhappy in some way or other, or disturbed and not understanding why the relationship with their staff isn't very good. So by tackling it, it helps everybody. It helps the organization, it helps the manager, and it helps the staff as well.
Right. And in your view, what kind of support do you think we can give our own managers in our organizations to help them not become bad bosses?
Yeah, so it's first of all, if we start when somebody arrives in your organization, what often happens is we assume, because we've read their CV and we've interviewed them, that they have all these talents as a manager. So the first thing to do is to not assume that, but to have good conversations with them about what development they feel that they need. And people often are very open about that. Maybe they're a bit worried about delegation, maybe they're not very good at giving feedback. So having those conversations is really important. And putting in place a good support structure. So it's really great if managers can be mentored by other managers in the organization, particularly if they're new, because then they get to know how the organization works. And these people have been there and done it, and you can get good advice. And often very helpful to provide coaching. So there's somebody that's got your back as a manager, because it can be a lonely place. As a manager. You can feel very isolated and feel that there isn't anybody to talk to when you're struggling with things. So having some sort of support structure like coaching and mentoring can be really important. and having a really good channel for feedback from more senior managers. So people that have more experience in the company or more leadership experience, being able to give feedback to your managers about what they see they're doing well, which is really important, and what they can change. And at the same time, finding out what the staff think as well. So companies that have 360 reviews, and in some places they're not really popular because it's a lot of work, but actually it's really helpful to find out what people beside you, above you, and below you think about your management, so that you can make that better. I think it's really important to do those things.
And what you're saying there prompts me to wonder. So I'm thinking, if, for example, there's a manager in our organisation, I think, from based on what you've said, could maybe do with a mentor, someone to kind of give them a hand. What's a kind of good way to have that conversation with them that doesn't make them feel like somehow they're failing just because they might have a development need?
So it would be good to raise the issue about, well, actually, there may be some things you can learn from this person in the organization, but it's really important that they're a good match. And you could also open the conversation by maybe already talking to the mentor, and the mentor making an offer. Maybe there are managers are taking on a new type of project, and this other mentor has done it before. And you can have a conversation that says, oh, well, this mentor has done this. They'd be really keen to help you get into this new area that you're doing. So offer it in a way that is developmental rather than actually fixing something that's broken. They're already managers. Let's help make them better. So making that offer.
And is it okay? So, for example, if I were talking to someone, I might be tempted to say, if I'd been through a similar thing, perhaps I'd had a mentor at some point to help me.
Yeah.
Actually open up as their leader about that and say, look, I found it really helpful when I did it. Is that a good thing to do, or should that be kept private?
No, that's a great thing to do, because the like how it is for me is a great conversation. It's a great conversation starter, and it allows us to show our vulnerabilities, and it allows us for people to understand that we're only human and that actually we all need help. So I got help from this mentor, and this is how it helped me, can be very helpful to somebody to get them to engage with that process. Yeah, I agree, Steve. Good idea.
And when obviously you see lots of different organizations in lots of different circumstances, when a company's got a really good open and listening culture, what kind of characteristics do you tend to spot?
Well, the first thing is you open the door and you walk in, and the place feels different from other places where you've been. And what you'll see is that everybody really owns their role, because they are valued for what they bring to the organization. And people feel comfortable opening up and talking. So junior staff will feel comfortable talking to very senior staff, because everybody trusts each other. There's an atmosphere of trust. Turnover of staff will probably be very low. People will want to stay with the organization. And you will find people going above and beyond what their job description is, but at the same time, they won't feel pressured to do that. They will do that because it's something that's important to them, and the organization is important to them. But there'll also be a good feedback culture. So staff might ask for something, and the organization will do it and will respond. You said, we did. So they'll have that evidence that they're responding to the needs within the organization. And also everybody feels like somewhere in the organization they're represented, that they're not like a loner. So for example, in organizations where you might have a high number of women, you will also see that represented at higher echelons within. So you have more women on the board. So everybody feels like they belong in that culture. And a good feedback culture really helps with that people know that they can speak openly about the help and support that they need, or where they want to change things, and also provide good quality, positive feedback about what's going well. So those sorts of things will be present in that type of culture.
And one of the things we try, and I'm not sure if it's a good thing, but it feels natural in Verve, we focus on diversity and inclusion. And we just say to people, no matter who you are, where you're from, whatever your background, your religious beliefs, however you show up in life and the world, you're very
Yeah.
welcome here, and you're part of our kind of Verve family. That's kind of the language
Mm.
we use, and that seems to have had quite a positive response. But it's got to be authentic, hasn't it?
Yeah, yeah, you can't be saying that and then have all your meetings at 7:30 in the morning, which means that, you know, people that have any caring responsibilities can't get there. It does need to be authentic. You need to be interested in people as people, and then they will respond to that. So I think, you know, the approach of bring your whole self to work is really valuable in that context. Yeah, definitely.
I know that's made a difference to me personally in different
Mm,
places I worked.
mm,
And we talked earlier on about, you know, if we spot someone who might need a bit of coach, you can share some of your own experience. One of the things sometimes I've struggled with and had some interesting feedback on is balancing that showing of vulnerability with actually it coming across as a bit of indecision.
mm.
And sometimes, what's the best way as a leader? What's the best way to think about that sort of an appropriate level of vulnerability, which doesn't make the people you lead start to doubt your ability to make good decisions?
Yeah, yeah. Am I working for this ditherer that doesn't know what to do? Yeah. And I think being human is really important as a leader. Often I've talked to teams that say, oh, well, we work for this person and they never fail. They always work really, really hard. And actually, what are you showing to people? What role model? What are you as a role model to your people? How do you want them to see you? And sharing your concerns, I think, is very valuable.
Mm,
Sharing where you've needed help in the past and what has helped you is really valuable. Talking about when you've got things wrong makes your staff understand that actually it is human to get
mm,
things wrong. Talking about when you've got things wrong, but actually then what you did to make it right, what you did to fix it. All of those things are really, really useful. What we want to see is we don't want to work with a manager that's a robot. So therefore, showing empathy for people and thinking about what is it like to be in your shoes as a team member is really important. And that means we will sometimes talk about our own issues to establish a good level of rapport with that team member. And that does mean that we open ourselves up to be a little bit vulnerable, but we all benefit from that in that we can make more of a human connection. And I think sometimes you raise a really good point about indecision, because there are times where it isn't clear what you should do, the decision that you should make. And I think it's very valuable to decide that my decision at the moment is not to make a decision, but also to share that.
mm.
So I've looked at all the information, and what I see at the moment is I don't feel comfortable making a decision with the information that I've got. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to gather more information, or I'm going to try more things out, whatever it is. And then that enables your staff to know that you're still on it. You're not being indecisive. You've decided not to make a decision. But often what's very useful is to make a decision, a small decision, on the understanding you can then change your mind tomorrow. You can do something different tomorrow. And that can sometimes put people off, that I make this decision and that's it forever, for the rest of this company life. But
Mm.
actually, we can do something different the following day. We can make a different decision as long as we can back that up with information and data and ideas about why we've done that. Yeah.
I think when you know that word "why" you've used there is really important,
Mm,
isn't it? From uh,
yeah,
so people understand what they're seeing and why they're seeing it. They don't, so you're not kind of leaving
definitely.
them guessing as to why
Yeah.
what you're doing.
Yeah.
Now, I know from conversations we've had previously that you're a firm believer in, you know, paying people for the value they bring to an
Mm.
organization rather than the time they spend, you know, at the office or in front of their screen. And thinking about how a good boss would be in that situation, how would a good boss manage productivity?
So, you know, in any commercial sector, we've got to produce things, we've got deadlines to achieve, and people need to do their work. But what has become apparent through the pandemic, certainly, and obviously before that as well, is that people react better if you're not clock watching and say, oh, look, you're 5 minutes late now, you know, I'm going to knock that off your salary, you know. People react better when you trust them. So that means that you need to have a meaningful conversation about what is it that you want to get from them, outcomes. What is it they're going to do? They're going to write a report, okay? And so therefore, how long is that going to take? Have they got to get input from other people? Have they got to gather data? Okay, so let's agree between you and your staff member the deadline for that, and it's 2 weeks. But they're not just writing the report, they're doing other things as well. So you need to have an agreement on an outcome and a deadline, and the flexibility to have that discussion with that team manager, check in, how's it going? Are you going to make the 2-week deadline? Rather than agreeing with them how many hours they're going to work during the day to get that done. We need to trust people, particularly when they're experienced, to know, actually, this is a reasonable quantity of work for me to achieve in this time. And so they can work in their own way. I have a very good friend of mine that's very introverted, and if you put him in an office with a load of people and watch how he works, he will be really terrible. But if you send him home, he'll produce things really, really well. So knowing how people work, trusting them to work in the way that they find best for them is really important. And at the same time, we need to model what it is we want from our staff. So that means that if you need to go home for your kids' sports day at 2 o'clock, then you do that, but actually you've done as much work as you can during that day, and you allow your staff to do those things as well. Looking after themselves and the people around them is really important, and we need to make space for that. We need to make space. So in my mind, it's about focusing on outcomes rather than presenteeism. That would be my approach.
And where, I mean, this is a situation I've had to look at, where perhaps colleagues in the team are saying, you know, such and such a person, when they're on one of their office days, they always come in late and they go early. I know I struggle to know how to respond. I mean, I try and do what you've said about managing by outcome. I'm not always very good at it. What's the best way to kind of tackle that kind of, you know, you kind of think they're doing a good job, but you're not 100% sure, perhaps because I haven't done something right. But colleagues saying, oh, you know, why does that person always go home at 3 o'clock when we work in later? I'm just not sure sometimes how to respond.
Yeah, and it's not easy, but sometimes if we think about it, if we like squash all of our working time at the office into the time that it actually takes, it's a lot less than 9 to 5, because we talk at the coffee machine, we have conversations with people in the corridor. So the question for me is, like, what evidence do I have that that person has produced meaningful work in that time? And have a conversation with the other colleagues about, okay, so what have they produced in the longer time that they're there as well? And what we'll often find is that people that are really focused when they're in the workplace are able to achieve more in a lesser time. Okay. But also, I think a conversation with the person who is using that lesser, arriving late, you know, leaving early, about what the culture is and how their colleagues perceive them could be very valuable, because they might not know that that's how they're perceived by their colleagues. And it would be very helpful to share that. There might be very real reasons why they're doing that, and understanding that as a manager is the best way for you to then, you know, manage the team as a unit and help that person to feel that they fit in. Because if they find that out, then they might be worried about how they fit in with the rest of the team. So I think focusing on, again, do they produce meaningful work in that time? Having a conversation with them about whether it is about timekeeping. It might not be about timekeeping. It might be about, well, I feel I can achieve everything in that time. Therefore, I feel justified in leaving early. So conversations are really, really important. And one of the key things about bad managers is that they don't have those conversations. They're frightened about having those conversations. So communication is really, really important in leadership and management. Thanks.
When you were sharing your thoughts on that particular issue, you talked a little bit about chatting at the coffee machine and those sorts of things. And in fact, what we found, particularly during the pandemic or coming out of it, that people making those physical connections with each other and having those chats
Yeah.
and spending time chewing over a business issue or a personal issue really kind of built the mood up a little bit among people. People start to feel less isolated. Is that something you've seen as businesses have worked their way out of the pandemic?
Yeah, definitely. And it was the main thing that everybody missed, that human contact. And there were a lot of organizations that I work with, was they tried very hard to replace that by having, so there were some organizations, they had like a lunch on Wednesday. So you make your lunch, you come and sit at your Zoom window and you eat your lunch with your colleagues. So they did that. They had other organizations, they had a games afternoon where people would bring a game and they would play a game on Zoom. But it's still not the same. And actually having that conversation when you pass somebody in the corridor, you don't get that on Zoom or on Teams. And that's been really valuable. And as a manager, sometimes those off the cuff remarks actually really help you to understand what is going on for your staff. So yeah, it's been a good thing to be able to get back to that face-to-face contact. Very important.
Definitely worth the commute. I always keep reminding myself that I'm stuck in the traffic. It is. I mean, I learned so much from those informal snippets that people share with you. Might spark an idea or tell me something's going on in their lives.
Yeah.
Going back to bad bosses, which I hope I'm not too bad a boss, but what's the outcome of working for a bad one? What tends to happen?
So when I think about when I've experienced this, the sorts of things that can happen are you can feel a lack of self-worth. So your boss doesn't support you, so you don't feel you have any value. You can end up feeling loss of independence, because what a bad boss often does is they will do all the work themselves and they won't trust their staff to do any work. So you become a little bit less independent, and you don't feel that there's an avenue for you to develop. So you can feel stagnant. You're not going anywhere. People can switch between jobs because they don't like this boss, so they'll go somewhere else in the hope that that boss will be better. And rather than thinking about what do I really want from the job, they can make sometimes very desperate decisions. I've just got to leave to get away from the boss. So they can make poor career decisions because of that. As we discussed earlier on, people can be away more because of mental health or physical health problems that they don't feel able to discuss within the team, with their manager, or with HR. And ultimately, what you lose is the organization loses talent, because you might have really good people who, if they are managed well, would put so much more back into the organization, but they're not managed well. So they're down the road, they've left, they've taken all their skills, the values that they might bring to the organization, and they've taken them to your competitor potentially down the road. And ultimately, what we can see is the very high financial cost of employment tribunals or court cases if you have really bad bosses that step over the line too far. So because of those things, the loss to the organization, the poor well-being of staff, it's really important that you address it at an organizational level. Very important.
It's fascinating and scary listening to all the things you're sharing. I mean, is there a question a boss can ask themselves, you know, fairly sort of straight off, or ask their teams, that would help them hold up a mirror to themselves, really with a desire to improve?
Yeah, so on your commute, when you're shut in the traffic, pondering, am I a bad boss? Yeah. So things like one of the things that bosses do that's bad is they micromanage and they take on everything themselves. So asking yourself the question, am I doing the stuff that only I can do? And am I helping my staff to do everything else? So that's a really good question. When did I last take a holiday? Because bad bosses don't model that good well-being. When did I last take a holiday? When did I last catch somebody doing something right and provide praise to them? Because bad bosses walk around nitpicking, finding people doing things wrong. So ask yourself, when did you last catch somebody doing something right? And when did I just simply thank somebody for doing their job? Not going over and above, but simply turning up and getting on with it. And then I think the $64,000 question is, would I work for me? Would I work for me? What would I say about my boss if my boss was me? Would I work for me? So those sorts of questions are really good. And the teams, questions to ask the teams are around, is there stuff that I'm doing that I need to stop doing? But also, is there stuff that I'm not doing that you really need me to do? And that might be related to feedback. It might be related to project management, whatever it is. And also, and I had this because I had a really fantastic virtual assistant, and she would talk to me on the phone, and she would say, what are you doing, Sue? I said, I'm doing this. She said, why are you doing that? I need to do that. So, ask the team, are there tasks that you see me doing that actually should be farmed out amongst the team? And then I think the good question for the team is, $64,000 question for the team is, what do we need to do? So this is we as a team, which includes a manager. What do we need to do to be a high performing team? How do we achieve that? And that'll be about relationships in the team, but it'll also be about leadership and management as well. Yeah.
A really nice, engaging question.
That's right. That's right.
So we're coming towards the end of the podcast. I'd just like to finish with one question. I know a very strong passion of yours is working with leaders and with women in particular. What was it that led you to this particular focus?
So I started my career in academia and in science. And what I found was basically there weren't any women. Well, there were women, right, but I couldn't see any women higher in the organization that could be role models for me. And that led to me leaving science because I couldn't see where I could go and working in publishing where there were a lot of women. Right. It was a very female heavy organization. But what I also found was that then higher up again, where were all the women? There weren't any women at high levels in the company. So I started to think there's something going on here. We're not supporting the women in the way that we should for them to be able to progress in the way that they want to. And that really led to me leaving that role in publishing and then taking on the role of becoming a trainer, becoming a facilitator to help people to develop, to move forward in the careers that they want, in the way that they want, rather than let's all model ourselves on a cookie cutter manager that looks like this. Right. Everybody has their own different manager style. Women manage differently and different women manage differently. So helping people to develop in a way that they want to develop as a leader and being authentic, bringing their whole selves to work was really important to me because I didn't have that. I didn't have that early on in my career.
Fantastic. And just before we finish, have you got any final thoughts you'd like to share with those people that are listening to the podcast?
Okay, so I wrote these down. So first of all, be yourself. It's really important. You can't show up at work as a manager trying to pretend to be somebody else. So being yourself, being authentic is really important. The people in your team are real people. They have lives. They are human. So demonstrate your care and understanding for the people in your team. Above all, be honest. If you screw things up, if you make a poor decision, if things don't work, then fess up to it and find a way to sort it out. It's really, really important. And the other thing I think about is that I do a lot of international work. So I'm on the plane a lot. And the people say, put your own oxygen mask on before you help other people. So when you translate that into your role as a manager, what that means is you must have a life outside work. You must role model looking after yourself, having a good quality well-being, because you need your staff to see that that's also important. So you need to look after yourself and have a life outside of work so that your staff can do that as well. It's really important to do that. And I'm sure that within Verve, that's something that's close to your heart as well.
It is, Sue. Thank you so much for sharing all of your insights. I've certainly learnt loads and sitting here thinking, oh, I better try that out, and maybe I'm not so good at this as I thought. So thank you very, very much for, on behalf of me and the whole Verve team, actually, for sharing all of your wonderful insights with us. It's been great. Thank you. Well, thank you all for being part of the Unlocking Workplace Wellbeing podcast from Verve Healthcare. If you want to improve well-being in your workplace through structured access to mental health support, physiotherapy, or access to a GP, or even how to manage personal finances in a better way, then we've got a solution for you. We've got a proactive approach which gets to the real heart of the problem. Please visit us at vervehealthcare.co.uk and be sure to subscribe to the podcast. Thank you.